Today's video is brought to you by War Thunder. More on them in just a bit. Today we find ourselves smack dab in the middle of the Old Kingdom period during the 5th Dynasty of Egypt. This was an uncertain time for the ancient civilization. There is no denying that the great pyramid builders of the 4th Dynasty left behind an impressive and long-lasting legacy, which is still admired to this day, but we also can't ignore the fact that they depleted Egypt's resources with their massive construction projects. Even during the 4th Dynasty, after Khufu and Khafra, the pyramids were already starting to shrink, a sign that Egypt simply did not have the materials and the workforce to maintain the same grand scale forever. This placed the 5th Dynasty pharaohs in a conundrum. You see, pyramids were still very much in vogue, and no self-respecting pharaoh would have been ready to journey to the other side without one. On the other hand, stone didn't grow on trees, so the 5th Dynasty had to compromise and make do with what they had. But that was okay, because the pharaohs of the 5th Dynasty had found a new hobby to keep them busy, and that was the worship of Ra, the sun god. The first pharaoh of the 5th Dynasty was Nyuserre, who reigned during the early 25th century BC. The 5th Dynasty is when we start to become more informed on the pharaohs of Egypt, because they began writing more stuff down. But the information is still severely limited compared to pharaohs from the later dynasties. For example, Nyuserre's parentage, his ascension to the throne, and his relationship with the previous king are all uncertainties. Tradition portrays him as part of the same royal family as the pharaohs before him. Perhaps he was the son of Neferhetepes, the daughter of Pharaoh Djedefre. There is zero information on Nyuserre's father, but given that he came to rule over Egypt, it would not be crazy to assume that the previous pharaoh, Shepseskaf, could have been his father. After all, they share the same naming convention, and scholars believe that the transition of power between the two was peaceful, because it seems that many important administrators from Shepseskaf's time were in office when Nyuserre became pharaoh. That does beg the question, though, of why exactly Nyuserre would trigger the start of a new dynasty and not simply continue the previous one. Well, for that, you can blame a scholarly priest named Manetho. He was the one who came up with the dynastic divisions, but he lived thousands of years later during the 3rd century BC. Modern historians have kept using his system more out of convenience than accuracy, but they are well aware that sometimes Manetho's separation seemed a bit random, such as in this case. If anything, the division might have more to do with Nyuserre's predecessor than with him, since Shepseskaf was somewhat of a maverick who broke away from the traditions established by the previous pharaohs of his own dynasty. Most significantly, he did not build a pyramid for himself, instead preferring to go old school and commission a mastaba, which was a smaller proto-pyramid with a flat roof that the pharaohs from the first dynasties used as tombs. He also moved away from Giza, instead building his mastaba at Saqqara, which again served as the necropolis for some of the older pharaohs. We don't know why Shepseskaf did any of this. He probably had a good reason, since his 4th dynasty was all about the pyramids. Was it simply that his nation had been left too impoverished by his predecessors to afford the resources for such a giant construction project? Or was it because the pyramid was strongly associated with the cult of Ra or Re, the sun god, and Shepseskaf felt that this minor deity was becoming too powerful? Ultimately, it didn't really matter, since none of his changes stuck around after he was gone. During the 5th dynasty, it looked like pyramids and sun gods were back on the menu, and it all started with Nyuserre. If the 4th dynasty is most notable for the magnitude of its pyramids, then the 5th one is defined by the worship of Ra and his emergence as the most powerful deity in the Egyptian pantheon. It seems that Nyuserre had a short and obscure reign of only 7 to 8 years, but that time was enough for him to complete 2 important constructions that set the tone for the pharaohs who followed him. First up was his own pyramid, which he built at Saqqara, close to the step pyramid of Djoser from the 3rd dynasty. The pyramid of Nyuserre, which nowadays lies in ruins, was a far cry from the grandeur and opulence of the colossal structures we see at Giza. It was less than 50 meters tall. Yet another sign that the construction projects of Khufu and his successors forced the 5th dynasty pharaohs to temper their expectations. For comparison, the Great Pyramid of Giza was almost 150 meters tall, roughly 3 times the height of Nyuserre's pyramid. However, it seems that the mortuary temple was quite nice, with rich and elaborate wall reliefs, so it could be that Nyuserre simply chose a quality quality over quantity approach to his final resting place. Or it could be that he was more interested in building something else, a sun temple that he dedicated to Ra, a practice that would be repeated by almost all the other 5th Dynasty kings, thus firmly establishing Ra as the new hotshot among the Egyptian gods. Also of note was the fact that the temple was constructed at Abu Sir, a new location that many of the 5th Dynasty rulers used as the spot for their eternal tombs. Every now and then, pharaohs liked to switch up their burial sites for various reasons and started a new necropolis. While we don't know any specific reason why the 5th Dynasty guys switched from Giza to Abu Sir, it's not that hard to imagine that they probably did not want their final resting places to be permanently overshadowed, both figuratively and literally, by the Great Pyramids of the guys who came before them. Just before we continue with today's video, I want to say that it is brought to you by War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. You can play with more than 2,000 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships in dynamic combined arms PvP battles. There's an in-depth customization system for vehicles, so you can apply hundreds of camouflages and markings to your machines. Every vehicle's incredibly detailed and modeled down to all of their individual parts, offering an immersive combat experience. Look, as a fan of history, you probably are as well watching this channel, you'll really enjoy the historical accuracy that War Thunder has. You can play War Thunder on PC, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, or the previous console generation. It has incredible graphics and detail and is in 4K. And when you combine this with the amazing sound effects and music, well, it's a great immersive experience. So play War Thunder today and get a large free bonus pack if you register through my link, which includes multiple premium vehicles, premium accounts, boosters, and much more. Or just go to playwt.link/WT Biographics bonus. And now back to today's video. Nyuserre was followed on the throne by Sahur, and once again, the circumstances behind his ascension remain a mystery, although most scholars believe that Sahur was either the son or younger brother of the previous pharaoh, which is a pretty safe bet whenever a succession occurs peacefully. From a construction perspective, Sahur mirrored his predecessor closely. He too built a pyramid and a sun temple, both at Abu Sir, thus abandoning the old necropolises of Saqqara and Giza completely. His pyramid was also of modest dimensions, even a little smaller than that of Userre, but once again, it had a snazzy mortuary temple. Sahur's reign was almost double the length of Userre, and it seems that he spent a lot of that time traveling to meet the neighbors, and he sometimes brought his army along for the ride. A military campaign against Libya is mentioned in the reliefs of Sahur's mortuary temple. There are several forays into the Sinai Peninsula, where Sahur plundered the local mines and returned to Egypt with shipments of copper and turquoise. In order to do this, Sahur had to vanquish a new foe, one that we had never seen mentioned before: the Mentu. Ancient history is full of these small and obscure kingdoms that never became big or enduring enough to leave behind evidence of their existence, and today they're simply remembered as names in a different culture's historical record. There is another one that is mentioned for the first time during the reign of Sahur, the land of Punt. This ancient kingdom was probably bigger and certainly more important to the Egyptians than Mentu because it was a one-stop shop for myrrh, incense, electrum, ebony, malachite, gold, resins, and all other sorts of rare and shiny commodities. Numerous references to expeditions to Punt were found for multiple pharaohs, going all the way up to the reign of Hatshepsut during the New Kingdom, 1,000 years after Sahur, so it seems that this civilization stuck around for a good while. Given how rich and long-lived it was, it is a little surprising that Punt left behind almost no traces of its existence. Today, archaeologists aren't even sure of its location, although they believe it was probably somewhere in the Horn of Africa, southeast of Egypt. Sahur was succeeded by Neferkare, and we find ourselves in the exact same situation as before, where we're not sure if the new pharaoh was the son or the younger brother of the previous one, although scholars seem to lean towards the latter. Also, like Sahur, Neferkare was responsible for one pyramid and one sun temple at Abu Sir. Word on the street is that his temple was the biggest and best of the bunch, but it is yet to be located, showing us that ancient Egypt still has mysteries that are waiting to be uncovered. The Pyramid of Neferkare is also worth mentioning. It seems that the pharaoh had regained some of the ambition and grandiosity that defined the 4th Dynasty because he definitely wanted to go out in style. Or maybe it was simply a sign that Egypt's coffers were starting to fill up once more and the pharaoh could afford to splurge again on his final resting place. Either way, Neferkare's pyramid was the biggest thing at Abu Sir. In fact, at a height of approximately 72 meters, it would have been taller than the Pyramid of Menkaure, which is the smallest of the three main pyramids of Giza. Another unique aspect of Neferuker's pyramid was that it started out as a step pyramid, which basically consists of multiple mastabas of decreasing size placed on top of the other. Another unique aspect of Neferuker's pyramid was that it started out as a step pyramid, which basically consists of multiple mastabas of decreasing size placed one on top of the other. Those had not been used since the Third Dynasty, so perhaps Neferuker was the original hipster who went for the retro look to be cool. The step pyramid was also 20 meters shorter, so maybe the pharaohs saw that one finished and decided that it needs to be bigger. Unfortunately for Neferuker, he never saw the finished product. He might have had the resources and the ambition, but he didn't have the health to see the construction to the end. He died after an approximately 10-year reign with his pyramid unfinished, but luckily for him, some of his successors liked him enough to complete his tomb. As far as Egyptologists are concerned, the Pyramid of Neferuker was one of the most significant structures of ancient Egypt, not because of its size or how it was built, but because of what they found inside it. The Abu Sir papyri are one of the largest collections of Old Kingdom documents in the world. Most notably, they are the earliest known documents that were written in hieratic script. We're sure you've all heard of hieroglyphics, the famously intricate writing system used in ancient Egypt, but that was actually reserved mainly for formal documents, religious texts, wall inscriptions, and things like that. Nobody had time to draw birds and eyes of Horus just to write a receipt or a recipe, so the Egyptians created hieratic, which was a simpler and faster cursive script. It was used for almost 2,000 years until it was replaced by an even simpler script known as Demotic. His contributions to our understanding of ancient Egypt aside, nothing else of note is known about Neferuker. But if it makes you feel any better, we know even less about the two pharaohs who followed him, since they only stuck around for a cup of coffee before biting the dust. The first, Shepseska. Maybe. Egyptologists are actually uncertain where exactly he fits in the timeline, but after Neferuker seems to be the best bet. He wasn't the previous pharaoh's son, so he most likely was his brother. This means that he was probably pretty old when he took the throne, which could explain why his reign only lasted for a few months. As you might imagine, Shepseska did not get the chance to make much of an impression. It seems like every dynasty has at least one guy who survives as nothing more than a name on a wall somewhere. All we can say about Shepseska is that he probably started work on his pyramid. There is an unfinished platform at Abu Sir, and by the process of elimination, Egyptologists surmise that it belonged to him. However, construction on it only lasted for a few weeks, and unsurprisingly, the pharaohs who came after him felt no obligation to continue his work, since it meant almost starting from scratch, and they had their own immortal souls to worry about. Therefore, Shepseska is the only ruler of the 5th dynasty without any kind of tomb. His successor made a slightly bigger impact, but not by much. His name was Neferfra, and there is actually evidence to suggest that he was the eldest son of Neferuker and his queen, Kenthus II. He was around for a couple of years, enough to start work in his pyramid at Abu Sir. There is also word that he built a sun temple, but for the moment it remains purely hypothetical. Either it exists and we haven't found it yet, or it was never finished and possibly repurposed by another pharaoh. As far as his pyramid was concerned, only the first step of Neferfra's tomb was completed by the time he died. Again, his successor did not finish it, but he did improvise and turn it into a mastaba, so Neferfra would at least have something. He also completed the mortuary temple, so obviously the next pharaoh felt some kind of duty towards him. That's not surprising, given that the historical record suggests that the next pharaoh was Neferfra's younger brother. His name was Nyuserre, and he would go on to have the longest reign so far, serving as pharaoh for at least 2.5 decades. This gave him enough time to work not only on his own building plans, but also to finish or renovate a few projects from earlier pharaohs, such as the solar temple of Userkaf, Neferfra's aforementioned mortuary temple, the pyramid of Neferuker, who by most accounts would have been Nyuserre's father, and even the valley temple of Menkaure from the 4th dynasty. As far as his own constructions were concerned, Nyuserre followed the traditional 5th dynasty formula. One sun temple, one pyramid at Abu Sir, plus the extra DLC stuff, mortuary temple, queen's pyramid, valley temple, etc. Strangely enough, his own pyramid was on the smaller size, even though he had plenty of time to make it as big as he wanted. Even in his glory days, it rose to just slightly above 50 meters. This was probably due to the pyramid's odd location. All of the previous ones were situated on the same axis, with plenty of space between them, but Nyuserre chose to squeeze his pyramid between those of Sahur and his father. This allowed him to do a clever bit of recycling by taking the unfinished unfinished causeway and valley temple that reached the Nile River, which originally were intended for his father's pyramid, and divert them to his own, thus saving a fair bit on materials and labor. Maybe Nyuserre was just practical and frugal, or maybe this was a sign that Egypt was still hurting financially following the exorbitant excesses of the 4th dynasty. Or maybe Nyuserre simply had other priorities. His pyramid might not have been anything to inscribe home about, but his sun temple was a different matter. He built it at Abu Gorab, a short distance from Abu Sir, and made it entirely of stone, which was a costly endeavor, but it ensured that the winds of time would not be able to huff and puff and blow it down as easily as the others. It included a giant obelisk and a boat replica also made of stone, which might have had some kind of symbolic or ceremonial significance. It's fair to say that Nyuserre was the most prolific builder of the 5th dynasty. Despite the long length of his reign, he spent most of his time on construction projects and renovation projects, so he really didn't have much time for anything else. We're going to venture into murkier waters following the death of Nyuserre. His successor, Menkaure, is very poorly attested in the historical record, and the few things that we do know about him only make him more mysterious. For starters, you'll notice that his name does not end in RE, in reference to the sun god, a divergence from all other 5th dynasty pharaohs except for Userkaf. Does this mean that Menkaure wasn't a Ra devotee? Well, maybe and maybe not, since ancient texts say that he still built a temple to worship the sun god. If it exists, it has yet to be found because Menkaure chose to abandon Abu Sir. We don't know what prompted this move, but Nyuserre was the last ruler to be buried there because the pharaohs who followed him decided to pack up and go back to Saqqara. Menkaure built his pyramid at Saqqara as well. At least, that's what we assume. Its location is also up in the air a bit, and it wasn't until 2008 that some ruins known as the Headless Pyramid were tentatively identified as belonging to the pharaoh, although it is not exactly a settled matter yet. Menkaure had a short reign of 8 to 9 years, but his successor went in the complete opposite direction and enjoyed the longest reign of the 5th dynasty, possibly even exceeding 40 years according to some king lists. His name was Djedkare, and although he is well attested in the historical record, his relationships with his predecessors and his successor are unspecified. Scholars usually take the safe approach and assume that he was the son or younger brother of the guy who came before him, since there's no sign of him being usurped. Just like Menkaure, Djedkare began to stray from the traditions established by the other pharaohs of the 5th dynasty. For starters, he did not build a sun temple at all, and this wasn't due to a lack of time or resources. He chose not to do it, perhaps a sign that the worship of Ra had fallen out of fashion with the new pharaohs. He also favored Saqqara over Abu Sir as the location for his pyramid. Djedkare constructed his final resting place close to Shepseskaf, the final pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, who, if you'll recall, was himself a bit of a rebel who didn't like to follow tradition and was not a card-carrying member of the cult of Ra fan club. Maybe Djedkare purposefully did this to align himself with Shepseskaf, or perhaps he just liked the location. Djedkare certainly wasn't hostile towards the earlier pharaohs of the 5th dynasty. According to inscriptions, he even helped restore some of their funerary temples at Abu Sir that were looking a little run down. And that collection of ultra-important papyri written in hieratic script that was found inside the funeral complex of Neferkare, it was dated to Djedkare's reign, so he definitely did not abandon Abu Sir completely. Given his long reign, Djedkare had time to extend his administrative interests to areas other than the journey of his eternal soul. He enacted reforms that led to a rebalancing of power for both priests and state officials. Many lower officials lost some of their authority, while high-ranking bureaucrats such as viziers even got their own pyramids or mastabas, although on a much smaller scale, of course. It was probably the first time in Egypt that we saw evidence of an effort to decentralize power and spread the authority around a bit instead of placing it all on the shoulders of one guy. Unfortunately, what exactly motivated Djedkare to take such actions remains a mystery. Was he somehow coerced into doing so? Was he manipulated by clever viziers, or did he do it of his own free will? When Djedkare died sometime during the mid-24th century BC, he was succeeded by Unas, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty. Even though he is also credited with a long reign that spanned several decades, there is not much to note about him. It seems that the 5th dynasty ended not with a bang, but with a whimper, once again raising the question if there was any valid reason to create separation between the 5th and 6th dynasties instead of merging them together. Anyway, the most noteworthy thing about Unas was, unsurprisingly, his pyramid. Like his predecessor, he stayed at Saqqara and completely skipped over the Sun Temple. At an original height of approximately 43 meters, the Pyramid of Unas was the smallest of all the 5th Dynasty pyramids, the ones that were finished, we mean. Even so, the structure ranks highly with archaeologists, because inside it they found the pyramid texts, a collection of funerary writings that represent the oldest Egyptian religious texts ever found and among the oldest in the entire world. Outside of the pyramid, Unas built tombs for 2 of his queens, Nebet and Kenut. This was quite common as many other pyramids came with miniature versions of themselves for the queens of the pharaohs, but Unas chose to bury his queens in mastabas instead of tiny pyramids. This is more of a curiosity than anything with a deeper meaning. The pharaoh probably did this due to a lack of resources, hence why his own pyramid was so diminutive in stature, but it did make Unas the first to employ the pyramid-mastaba combo. The end of his reign, and the ending of his dynasty for that matter, came with the same kind of uncertainty as all the other successions so far. Maybe Manetho knew something we don't, and he had a good reason to close the 5th dynasty following the death of Unas. Maybe the pharaoh died without an heir, and this led to a succession crisis. This is certainly a possibility that Egyptologists have considered, although it remains, at the moment, more of an idea than a proven theory. Even so, we will stick with the general consensus and bring our coverage of the 5th dynasty to an end until we resume with the 6th dynasty, which represented the end of the first golden age of Egypt, known as the Old Kingdom. Just before we end today's video, thank you again to War Thunder for sponsoring it. Get a large free bonus pack if you register through my link below, which includes multiple premium vehicles, premium account, boosters, and much more. Or just go to playwt.link/WT Biographics bonus. And thank you for watching.